Hello, good afternoon, good morning. I hope you can all hear me very well. Welcome to session 3 of the online workshop on risk-informed governance, climate action, and finance mechanisms for local resilience. My name is Daria Mokhnachova. I'm Program Officer at the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, the Office for Northeast Asia, and the Global Education and Training Institute, which is based in Incheon, South Korea. And I will be moderating this session today. So in the two previous sessions, we looked into innovative finance mechanisms for disaster risk reduction and into risk-informed governance. This third session is led by UNDR Global Education and Training Institute. And today we will explore the concepts of urban resilience, as well as key tools that can help cities to promote disaster risk reduction and climate action, and to contribute to achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So in this session, we will have two presentations. The first one will look into urban risk and resilience and present the 10 essentials for making cities resilient. And the second one will introduce the disaster resilience scorecard for cities. Then after a short break, we will have several exercises to apply the scorecard. And we will also look into case studies and examples from other cities that have already used the scorecard. And then we will finish the session with a short and fun quiz. Before we start, I would like to make a few housekeeping announcements. So as mentioned in other sessions, we will issue a joint certificate of participation at the end of the workshop. So one of our requirements for attendance is active participation. So please make sure to write in the chat box your full name, country, and affiliation in order to receive a certificate of participation. I would also like to ask you to kindly mute your microphones throughout the sessions, unless you are speaking from the floor to ask questions. And regarding questions, so there will be a Q&A at the end of each presentation. So if you have any questions during the presentations, please make sure to post them in the chat box. And there will be also an opportunity to ask them at the end. As mentioned earlier as well, the presentations will all be shared with you through the online e-learning platform that colleagues from UNPOG introduced you to last week. And so these are the main announcements. And we're ready to proceed. So the first presentation will be made by Mr. Sanjay Bhatia, the head of office of UNDR Onea Getty. And he will look into understanding risk, urban resilience, and the 10 essentials for making cities resilient. Sanjay, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dasha. So welcome, welcome to all the participants. And so what we're going to do is start off with a little introduction, so that you are all on the same page as far as the background of the scorecard is concerned. And then after that, we will go into the exercise as Dasha has just explained to you. So let me start by sharing with you this presentation. So we're going to basically look at making cities resilient, the 10 essentials of the making cities resilient. So basically what does 10 essentials mean? It is the Sendai framework, as many of you already know about the Sendai framework. So what does the Sendai framework mean for local governments, and how do you unpack it for the local governments? So what has been done is the Sendai framework has been kind of broken into 10 chapters, let's say. So each of those is the 10 essentials, and we'll look at that, and we'll also look at some of the cases of how cities are implementing these 10 essentials. But first, a little bit of, again, background. You remember on the first day, we had done a background session on basic concepts and trends of DRR. So again, um, looking to reiterate, re-emphasize what we discussed on day one. Firstly, that disasters are not natural. So hazards can be natural, but disasters are not. And you can see the top picture. It's a barren landscape. There's nobody living there. So if there is an earthquake or a flood, it doesn't, or a landslide, it doesn't have any impact on human dwellings. And so we say that the impact of disasters are by the choices we make. Similarly, on the top right side, you see it's a desert, and anything that happens there, it's not impacting human settlement. But when it does impact human settlement, as you see in the bottom left picture, that's a scene from an earthquake. So here what you see is probably bad location of the building. Secondly, not complying with the building code. And as a result, the central buildings have collapsed, whereas you see the other buildings on the side, they have not. And then the last picture on the bottom right, you see that is not yet a disaster, but it is a disaster waiting to happen. You can see it is a sloped landscape. On that, people have built their dwellings, and any heavy rainfall or soil movement can cause a major disaster, a landslide or a mudslide. So again, disasters happen because of the choices we take, and there are choices available to us which can reduce the impact of disasters or help us to avoid disasters totally. Now, we talk about resilience. It's a very important term nowadays. So what we have to understand about resilience is also that resilience is a very broad definition. So it is way beyond simple risk reduction, because resilience is looking at not only the hazards, it's also looking at the issues of vulnerability, exposure, and how that can the situation can be improved. It's also looking at the different sectors that a city is made up. So it's not just a city, it's also a country or a state or a province. They all have the different sectors. So here we see the healthcare, the ecosystem, the public safety, the transportation, water, energy, and so on. These are all different systems which make up a government or administrative unit. These are all interconnected. In this example, we discussed on day one also about COVID, how it started as a health issue and a health emergency, and impacted price of oil, impacted public transportation, impacted jobs, impacted different sectors. So we need to understand that when we talk about resilience, we're talking about the system of systems, that everything is interconnected, and we need everything, all sectors, to be resilient. If one sector is not resilient, then that will be our weakest link, and that will cause a cascading impact on other sectors. So what is the approach? And that we'll talk about more in detail in the second part of today. But basically using the 10 essentials, so looking at the Sendai framework, applying it to the local government level, and then using the tools which are built around the 10 essentials. So the scorecard, which has a number of indicators, and all of these indicators are clustered or grouped around the 10 essentials. So we use these indicators to do an analysis, to do some gap, to identify gaps, and then identify the actions which are needed to address these gaps. So putting it all together into one plan, which we call the DRR strategy or the DRR action plan at the local level. And of course, there is the MCR 2030, a global initiative, which promotes this approach, these tools, and many other tools of different partners. So 10 essentials. Again, these are clustered into 3 groups. First group looking at governance, second group looking at planning, and the third group looking focused more on the response and the aftermath of a disaster. So what happens after a disaster is struck. And we'll look at cases about all of these. This link is given here, which shows where you can download more information on this. And the essentials are to organize, to identify scenarios, to strengthen the financial capacity. So these are all governance issues. Then looking at urban development planning, looking at natural ecosystem, looking at institutional capacity and societal capacity, and the infrastructure resilience. So these are all related to planning. And then ensuring the response and also the build back better. That means learning the lessons from the disaster and trying to apply them in the recovery. So those are the response planning issues. So as we go ahead, if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat and we'll address them in the Q&A. So the first essential, organizing for disaster resilience, meaning to establish some kind of mechanism which can help to coordinate all the different sectors which are essential for resilience, including, if required, having a legal framework to support that. So one example, the government of Philippines, they developed a national disaster risk management plan. And under this plan, they have asked each local level unit at the subnational level to develop a local DRR or disaster risk reduction and management plan. So that is organizing for resilience, creating the governance structures. They have also provided some kind of funding to help them help the local governments achieve this. So they have the local calamity fund, of which 5% can be used for various DRM activities apart from response. So for capacity building, for purchasing equipment, for training, and so on. So so this is looking at organizing for disaster resilience, a good case from the Philippines. Essential 2 is trying to understand the risk that you face. So through scenarios and risk profiles and so on. But basically to understand what is the risk that I face. So here you see the map of Nepal, for example. This is Nepal, and it is showing in red, yellow, and orange, and dark brown, the level of risk that different districts, which is subnational unit, not cities, but administrative unit known as districts, which different districts face. And a very good example is from the Canary Islands, from Lanzarote. What they did was they had an assessment, an older one. So they updated it and they included issues of vulnerability into it. And with the help of this, with the help of this new diagnosis, they were able to develop a sustainable development strategy for the Canary Islands and 8 local action plans for their 8 local governments. And as a result of this, they have developed a number of projects, and these projects are being financed and ongoing. So again, understanding, identifying the risk, and then applying it for future development. So this is another good example. The third essential is the finance, the money. So having mechanisms in place to fund all these aspirations, all these activities for increasing resilience. Now, this is an interesting slide. It shows the total ODA, which is the Overseas Development Assistance, in 2010 to 2019, where it was $1.17 trillion. And out of that, the amount spent on disasters was 133 billion, so very small amount. And most of what was spent, and then that 133 billion was also spent on emergency response. So very little actually for prevention and preparedness. And as you remember from the first day, there are many calculations. A dollar spent saves $6 in response and recovery. So you can see that how we are missing an opportunity here to spend more money on preparedness and prevention, and in that way reduce the emergency response expenditures. So anyway, another example on the financing. So this is a town in Japan. What they saw was that if they tried to enforce land use, or rather to do a scientific land use planning and to restrict land usage, then it would involve massive relocations, and they didn't have enough suitable areas to do so, because a lot of Japan is mountains. So the plain area is along the coast, and that is the issue. So they have very less land which can be used for habitation. So what they did was instead they looked at all the options and instead developed tsunami evacuation towers, which are vertical towers. You climb up to the top and you are safe from the tsunami. And they were able to achieve financing from the national government and the prefecture government, which is the provincial or the state government, by developing these plans. So again, trying to make the financing available by developing projects which could be financed by the state government and the national government. Then essential 4 is about urban development, urban design, and using the risk information to inform the urban development. So again, a good example is from Hoboken in New Jersey, USA. So they were impacted by Superstorm Sandy or Hurricane Sandy, and 80% of the city of Hoboken was flooded, resulting in $100 million damage to private property and $10 million damage to the city's property, to the municipality's property. So what they did was they wanted to integrate risk into their long-term urban plan. So what they did first was develop a hazard mitigation plan, and they looked at how to use the land in a smart way, so that there could be some areas which can be used as water retention facilities. So for example, parks or sports fields. These can be they can help to retain excess water that comes due to a storm or sea surge or flooding. And so what they did was they integrated this kind of green infrastructure into their development plan, and as a result, they are much more resilient than before. So integrating the risk information into the urban development plans, and thereby becoming more resilient. Essential 6 is about using the ecosystem to protect the municipality or the local government's land. So here we see in Cambodia, good practice of tree planting and then looking after the trees so that they can help reduce the damage associated with floods and with high winds. Um, so again, using nature to protect. There are many other examples in Sendai, if you remember, where the tsunami impacted the most uh, in the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami. They did a study and they found that the indigenous plants did have a role. They were growing as forests along the coast, and they did have a role in reducing the velocity of the tsunami wave and the force of the wave. So planting indigenous plants along the coast helps. In many countries, there is a replanting of mangroves happening because mangroves help to protect against sea surge and storm surge. Then in countries like in cities of in the Netherlands, they used to build sea walls or levees to keep the seawater out. But now they are dismantling those levees in many places to allow um, uh, the water to come in with the high tide and converting those areas into natural buffers so that they can absorb the excess water, but at a lower cost. So they are able to protect the city from storm surge, but they don't have to uh, expend so much resources as is required to develop levees. So again, using nature as a buffer to protect the city. Then enhancing this institutional capacity. So that's essential 10, meaning capacity of the local government, but also of the institutions which are there. So one example from Sweden, where in that city they have a contingency plan for flooding, which has been developed in coordination with stakeholders, including from civil society. And they also build the capacity of their staff by making them take courses on climate change, adaptation, environmental management, and so on. In this manner, what they're doing is they're building the capacity of the institution, because once the institutional capacity is built, there is the institutional memory. So even if 1 or 2 or 3 persons are changed or they move on or they retire, the institutional memory will continue and it will help to maintain the resilience of the city. Then increasing the capacity of the society, meaning of the citizens. Again, involving citizens in drills, making them aware of the hazards, explaining to them what to do and what not to do in case a disaster strikes, and helping the private sector also become more resilient. And now we are seeing, for example, it started with COVID, that the supply chains were disrupted, and there are many delays in delivery of goods. There are many delays in manufacturing of goods because of these supply chain disruptions. And then it has continued and become even worse with the war in Ukraine. As a result, food grain supplies are not happening. So it is all this is important for the private sector, amongst others, because they are more dependent on global supply chains. So looking at your suppliers, seeing how resilient they are, having alternates available, and so on, these are all good practices. So the city of Sao Paulo in Brazil has been teaching students what to do in case of disasters through a game called The Adventure. And it is free, it is online, accessible from computers, and more than 30,000 students have played this game and understood how to use what preventive measures to use. In Korea, We have a similar program using another game called Riskland, which is more like a game of Monopoly, where you move around a board and you pick up cards and you get challenges and basically keep trying to move from one end to the other end, overcoming these challenges. So helping children to learn about disasters and what to do, what not to do is a good practice, because not only will they learn for themselves, but they will pass on this knowledge and information to their families. So you can really reach out and strengthen societal capacity through this. So again, essential to build the capacity of society. Now we come to the last part of the planning one, which is the essential 8 on infrastructure resilience. So obviously, when we talk about different sectors and the interlinkage between the different sectors, so system of systems approach, infrastructure is a key component of all the sectors, whether it be roads or railway lines, ports, airports, water supply, electricity supply, sewage, and so on, telecommunications. All of these are very important infrastructure, without which systems would collapse. So having all this with the components of resilience built in is not so easy, especially because even in a city, different sectors are often run by different agencies. Some may be federal agencies, some may be state agencies, some may be local government agencies, others may be private sector. So for example, in the place where we live, the telecoms are purely private sector. The health sector is again a large component is private sector. Schooling is private and public. Water supply, electricity supply are different utilities. So bringing them all together and making sure that they all get the same message on resilience is not easy. It means breaking silos, breaking barriers. So in Sendai in Japan, again, this is the same place where the tsunami had the most impact. They are trying to make their schools self-sufficient. So firstly, they put solar power into their schools, because the first thing that happens after a major earthquake, and in this case a tsunami, is the electricity gets knocked out. When that happens, there is problems with emergency response, there are problems with early warning, and all of the and evacuation. So they try to bring alternate supplies of energy into the schools. They practice drills, meaning they practice the evacuation, what to do, what not to do with the children twice a year. They have ensured that the schools are retrofitted so that they will survive the impact of a disaster. Some schools are designated as model schools, and they have a disaster prevention officer posted in that school or in that network of schools. So again, taking all the steps possible to ensure the resilience of the infrastructure, in this case, the school. Now we come to the last two essentials, 9 and 10, which are more about the when the disaster actually happens. And here you see a photo of the flooding in Bangkok in Thailand, and this is mostly industrial area. It was all flooded because, again, land use planning. What they did was they gave incentives to industries to establish their warehouses and manufacturing units in the floodplains of the river, and without actually doing a proper risk assessment. So as a result, when the floods did come, then all these, not only were these factories flooded and they had to stop production, but it impacted global supply chains, because a lot of the external drives, for example, are manufactured in this area. the global supply of external drives. So it was impacted to that extent that the prices went up around the world. So again, it's we can't say, oh, that happens somewhere else, because what happens somewhere else will have impact on us here. So we have to be understanding of that. So here's an example from Sri Lanka, where they established not only the early warning system through the disaster management center for the Gal district, which is near the capital, but also ensured the last mile linkage, because last mile linkage is the most critical part, but also the most difficult part of any disaster response. When the early warning is issued, usually through satellite imagery or other scientific equipment, it's at a capital. But how do you reach the villages, which may or may not have electricity, which may or may not have roads or high level of development or literacy challenges? So all these issues. So they formed village disaster management committees all along the coastline, and ensure that they will get the message, and then they will be able to pass on that message, especially in the case of tsunami warnings. So again, ensuring effective response. And then the last essential is about recovery and build back better. So learning from the lessons. Do we learn from what has happened? And once we have learned, do we apply that learning in the future planning? So Aceh in Indonesia, you remember the Indian Ocean tsunami, which killed more than 250,000 people. And here you see the bottom right, there is a picture of Aceh before the tsunami, and upper picture is after the tsunami. There's nothing left. So what the government did in the reconstruction, they established a special agency called BRR, and they developed a lot of good practices for land zoning, for reconstruction, for building design, for best practices on building the capacity of labor and so on, and job creation. So all of these activities were done, learning from the past disasters and making sure that those mistakes are not repeated. So build back better is all about that. It's not about spending a lot of money. It's about trying to analyze what happened, what went wrong, what went right, and then trying to address the issues that went wrong. That's what build back better is about. So that's what we talk about in the Essential 10. Now, just before ending, so all of this is available in this handbook, and you can download. It's also available in a few languages. And there's the link. And I posted the presentation already in the chat. So if you go to the top of the chat, this presentation is there. You can download. It's also on your workspace. And then there are some more key resources, again, which you can download and use. There's the Global Assessment Report 2022, which was just recently released. So all of these talk about these various aspects of resilience. So with that, I end my presentation and hand over back to Dasha.
Thank you very much, Sanjay, for this great overview of key concepts and 10 essentials. I would like now to invite participants to ask any questions if they have any. We have about 20 minutes for the Q&A. I would like to kindly ask you to keep your questions concise so we can have as many as possible. I see one hand raised. Dawood, please, would you like to ask a question?
I am Sanju Chaudhary from Kozbazar, Bangladesh. I currently work in local NGO UPSA, Young Power in Social Action. Actually, ma'am, at first joining for your workshop, have a Actually, happened no question first as well as past joining. Thank you. And
Oh, thank you for your appreciation. But just for everyone else's information, Bangladesh is a country which has done a lot, especially in the essentials 9 and 10. And Bangladesh, and also on the other side, India, especially the state of Andhra Pradesh, where there used to be a lot of deaths from cyclones, unfortunately. And the Indian Ocean area that part is impacted a lot by cyclones. You also remember in Myanmar, there was the cyclone Nargis. So so Bangladesh established very good early warning systems with the last mile linkage, which again, as I mentioned earlier, is a big challenge. And as a result, now large multitudes of people are evacuated with the early warning in time, and the casualties are very, very, very low. So earlier, from what it was, let's say in the 1970s to now, is a great difference, and all because of this application of DRR. And then I see Mr. Dev Kota, you have a hand up. Please go ahead.
I am from Nepal. Namaste from Nepal. I have one query about Nepal is the mountainous country covered in the Himalayan range in the northern part of Nepal. Every year the Himalayan, just like the avalanche and snowstorm, the snowstorm occurred in the Himalayan range, and the casualty and other disasters, just like in tourism sector, affect and loss and damage in the tourism destination and tourism business in Nepal. How can we prevent? How can we prevent from these such type of disasters in the mountain of Himalayan range of the tourism destination in Nepal? If you have any case study and any experience, please.
Yes, so mountainous area is of course more difficult, more challenging, and we have had some of the most devastating earthquakes in the Himalayas, in Pakistan, in Nepal. But there are, of course, many areas in the world which are mountainous, and they are also looking at these kind of the preventive measures. The first point is, especially because in the mountainous areas, it is the big challenge is earthquakes, so building codes. And one very interesting example I'd like to give you from Pakistan in the recovery. See, what they did was, there are, of course, we have building codes. You use concrete and protect the building and build it according to a code and standard, and then it will be safe from disaster. So that should be followed as much as possible. But what they saw was, especially in the remote communities, people were building houses. They build of stone, and that is the traditional building practice, and it is centuries old. So they tried to bring in new designs, but then people were not happy or not comfortable with the new materials, and they wanted to rebuild with the same practice of the stones. So what they did was, they got a university to look at the building practices. So these are the traditional building practices of the people. The university looked at it from the engineering perspective, and what they did was, they suggested certain changes in the practice. So using the same material, but with slight changes in how it is used, so that it can be compliant with the building code and it can be safe. So they did that. So that is one way of looking at it. So look at the traditional construction practices, but then have it examined by engineering lens, and then modify a little bit so that it can become more resilient. And then, of course, with that, what they did was they also provided some training to the traditional masons and labor, so that they could understand why. And I'll give you another simple example, which we had seen in India also. There is a thing called bar bender. So when a construction is being done, there is the metal rod passing through. And in earthquake prone areas, what happens is, or rather the practice was that they would put the bar through the steel bar through the
Yes.
building, and they would leave it open like this on the roof, and it's just like that. So when there is movement, then the cement around that bar would get loose, and the bricks would start falling apart, and then the wall will collapse. So, and the simple practice is to bend the bars. That's it. So you simply bend the bars like this, twist them like this, so that even with movement, the pillars don't collapse. And that's a simple practice which was not being done. So again, the university looked at it, then they taught people that this is what you need to do. You need to twist the bars at the end so that they don't come apart and the pillar does not collapse. So there are many practices, but I think the best is to first bring in the experts, which can be from the local university. There are engineering schools and architect schools, and they can all look at it and find decent practices. It's also about risk assessment. So in mountains, Himalayas are young mountains, so the landslides are very common because the slopes are unstable. So again, trying to bring in the practices of retention walls and so on to protect. But the risk assessment should be the first step, and then bringing in the local universities, I would suggest, to help find better practices.
Sanjay, we have two more questions, three actually. And if I could just ask participants who have already spoken to please mute your microphones.
I see one question is how can the importance of nature-based solutions. So let me answer this first. Nature-based solutions is one of the most important aspects of reducing disaster risk. You see, the thing is that all our concepts of, or rather the initial concepts of risk reduction was about controlling nature. So if it's floods, if a river floods, we put a dam on it. If there's a tsunami threat, we put a seawall. So, but with time, firstly, if you remember day one, we talked about increasing frequency and intensity of especially of water related hazards because of climate change. So storms are stronger, rainfall is high, is more. So all of these are also making an impact, and that infrastructure approach is now more and more failing. You build a seawall, but the storm surge is getting higher and higher. So how high will you build the seawall? And then at a certain stage, seawalls look ugly, so they block the view. Nobody wants to have their house on the coast looking at a wall. So that's one issue. Of course, they cost a lot. So what do you do? So now more and more countries are looking at nature-based solutions. And the example I gave you of Netherlands, where they are saying, instead of fighting with water, learn to live with water. And Netherlands is a very important example because most of the country is under sea level. And for years, they have been building sea walls and windmills to pump out the water. And they've been doing this exercise for centuries. But now, in certain areas, they have started opening up the sea walls because it's becoming too expensive to maintain and keep raising the level of the seawall. So they allow the water to come in. It comes into areas which are known as recreation zones. So they are biking paths, they are sports fields, they are places where people can enjoy water sports. They can do fishing, yachting, and so on. And then they have actually relocated some of the towns and municipalities away from that flood zone. So, but what they find is that this, in the long run, this is cheaper and more resilient than trying to do infrastructure. And another point, important point, if in this learning from the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami, was there were these sea walls, and people thought that these sea walls would protect them, but they didn't, because there was nothing wrong with the infrastructure. It was very strong concrete, but it was bashed, totally broken by the power of the wave. So nature is definitely very strong, and we should not underestimate. So now more and more they are looking at means of living with nature rather than trying to control nature, and that's why nature-based solutions is very important. I also see a question on integration of DRR strategy, urban agenda, and SDG 11. So thank you for this point. This is very important. These are all interrelated. Sendai framework, Paris Agreement, and the Agenda 2030, they are all saying the same thing. And basically, you think of it as Agenda 2030 or Sustainable Development Goals as the overarching ambition. We all want sustainable development ultimately, because the other development is going to kill our planet. So, but what is stopping us from achieving sustainable development? It is this constant disasters and the floods, the tsunamis, the whatever. All these disasters are pushing us back. And a lot of these disasters are climate related, because climate related means heavy rainfall, drought, cyclones, hurricanes, typhoons, landslides, and also climate related is diseases, because vectors will change. So all of these are bringing back or pushing back development. So pushing us away from sustainable development. So what we need to do is bring all three together and try to reduce disaster risk, which will also reduce climate risk, and also at the same time help us to achieve the SDGs. So there are tons of questions. Okay. Example on vulnerability mapping and some of the elements. So we know hazard mapping, right? So what are earthquake zones? Where are the wind? What are the wind speeds in various places? What are the potential for cyclones and all? Vulnerability mapping is looking at who is living in that area and on what is their status, what is their nutrition level, what is their health, what is their access to health services, what is their levels of literacy, of education, what kind of jobs do they do, what is their income. So all of this. So anybody, let's say, near the poverty line or below the poverty line, they are definitely more vulnerable than others, right? Because they will have less buffer to protect them. It's not just about putting them or giving them access to an evacuation shelter. What will they go back to? Like even in COVID, we saw many people lost their jobs. So those were the most vulnerable people. The people who had more, let's say, predictable jobs or predictable salaries, they are less vulnerable. So vulnerability mapping is about that. Then there was expand on essential 2 on understanding risk. Yes. So tools you can use, there are many tools available for understanding risk. There are multi-million-dollar risk assessments available, and then there are free and simple and easy to use tools like quick risk assessment, which you can download from MCR 2030 website, and many other tools. So there's a whole range. Again, I would say there are many partners in your local governments. For example, your local universities. They can help you with any kind of risk assessment, but also on developing any scenarios. So tap that resource, make a partnership with your local universities, and get them engaged. And even we have done, for example, in the past, we have worked with schools and asked them to do their own risk assessment. So have it like a competition amongst the children, different classes, do the risk assessment of the school, and then develop a school disaster management plan. So there are many ways of doing this. Then there was example of Asian country mitigating flooding by river bank walls. Again, this doesn't really work. You see the levees are, I have seen levees have been built and then the river has changed course. Then the levees are redundant and another part is being flooded. Or I have also seen levees being built, have been built, and then they have been breached. And when they breach, that is even more dangerous because then it's a flash flood. So that becomes even more dangerous. Third scenario I've seen, levees have been built and it is being breached on this side. So the people have deliberately breached on the other side so that the water goes that side. So again, we have to learn more and more to live with the water and adopt nature-based solutions. Trying to tame a river is a very difficult task, and there are many pros and cons. So even, for example, building dams to tame a river has a price. Now that price has to be decided by the people, by the government. It's not just the monetary value of the cement and concrete, because when you build a dam upstream, there is heavy siltation because the silt is piles up behind the dam. And ultimately, the life of the dam is determined by the amount of silt that it holds back. So, so again, there are all these issues which need to be seen. And then people are not willing to adapt to changes in their day-to-day life due to different norms. So again, here, the issue is about behavior, and that's what we talked. The hazards are natural. How we behave is what makes the disaster happen. So again, we need to see why people are behaving in a particular manner. I'll give you an example. I have seen so many instances where relocation has been done, and after a few months, people have come back to where they used to live. Why? Because their fields were there, so or their jobs were there, so they cannot give up their livelihoods just by relocating them. And that's why we have also always said that relocation is a very expensive option because it means relocating everything, not just the housing. You have to relocate the school, the hospital, the power supply, the livelihoods, the jobs, everything has to relocate. And if you're not ready to do that, don't do relocation. It won't work. So, so trying to understand or trying to do an economic analysis of how people are behaving and what economic incentives can cause them to change their behavior, that would help in the long run, rather than trying to force a decision upon them that you have to do this. That won't work. And that's why you see in many programs that people are not adapting. So should I continue?
We have two more questions, Sanjay. One is about Indian cities.
Okay, so this is about the potable water supply and getting contaminated, sewage and water supply getting contaminated. Again, these are issues of governance. So all of DRR, whatever we talk about disaster risk, it is all actually about governance. It is all about prioritizing what you want to do. So what do we want to do? Do we want good, resilient development? If so, DRR makes sense. But if you're not willing to go on that path, then it's an issue. It's just bad governance. So if the water supply and the sewage are mixing, sometimes it's because the pipelines are very old, and then they need to be upgraded. Sometimes it's because of poor quality. So then those are corruption issues. And again, so if the pipelines are old and they need to be upgraded, so then that's an investment decision. And then the city government or local government has to take a decision and to prioritize safe drinking water and then make these investments. If it's a issue of poor quality of the construction material, then it's a corruption issue, which is again, that is something to deal with governance. And again, it is how to deal with it. Again, it's citizens awareness. People can exert pressure on their government. So that would be the way to go. How can we enhance institutional capacity on DRR in developing countries where funds are restricted to infrastructure development? This is again, this is a big challenge. Everybody likes a big project. Everybody likes to pour tons of concrete into the earth and make big infrastructure. One of the reasons is corruption, because I don't know if you know, but Transparency International, for example, states that the construction industry is the most corrupt sector in the whole world. It's there everywhere. So so always in development plans, there is always bias towards investing in construction rather than in non-construction soft options like nature-based solutions. So, but I'll give you an example. This is from New York City, where they have 150-year-old pipe systems for stormwater drainage. And they needed to upgrade that. If you remember, in Hurricane Sandy, a lot of the subway stations in New York City were flooded. So they needed to upgrade this because what was built 100 years ago and 150 years ago was not able to handle the stormwater quantity that is coming now. So they looked at how can they upgrade their stormwater drainage system. And the bill was something like $7 billion to dig out the pipes and replace with new pipes. Okay, that's one option. They looked at then how can they use nature-based solutions along with this. So they saw an alternate plan, which was to put green areas along the footpaths, to increase the green areas on roofs and green roofs and other places, so that there is more absorption capacity in the city. So more green spaces which can absorb more of the excess rainwater. So as a result, they were able to reduce the cost of they had to renew the pipes, but they were able to reduce the overall cost of that project by $2 billion. $2 billion is a lot of money. And they saved it by going green. So again, an example of there are savings there if you look at all the alternate options. Don't just go for the heavy investment in infrastructure. Then there was I'm interested with the QRE tool. How can we tap? I think my colleague Mai can put in and she'll refer to it maybe quickly later in her presentation, but she can also put the link. You can download, it's freely available. It's also simple and easy to use, so you don't need any training to use it. Okay, I think we are done. Mai actually did post a link to the quick yes, it's there.
Tool. As far as I can see, we've addressed all the questions. So thank you so much, Sanjaya, for these great examples as well. And we are ready to move on to our next presentation, which will be delivered by my colleague Mutarika Pruksapong, my Program Management Officer at UNDR Onea Getty. And she will introduce a very useful tool for disaster resilience planning, the Disaster Resilience Scorecard for cities. Mai, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dasha. And as Dasha has introduced me, my name is Mutarika Pruksapong, and everyone calls me Mai. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you who attended the sessions today. And I hope that you have now get the sense of what the 10 essentials are about. And you may start to wonder now, like now that we understand the framework about the 10 essentials, if you are a part of the cities and you want to start applying this 10 essentials for making city resilience to guide your resilience planning and improve a lot of things that you can do on disaster risk reduction, where can you get started? So this is the part where I'll be introducing to you. So before I go further, let me try to share my screen and let's see if you can see it. Well, give me just 1 second, please. There we go. Okay, I think you can see now the presentation I'm showing. So yes, so as I mentioned that as you are now understanding the framework about the 10 essentials for making city resilient, you may start to wonder, like if you want to get started, to want to understand and apply the framework, where can you begin? So this session will be introducing to you this disaster resilience scorecard for cities, which is obviously the tool that's highly linked with the 10 essentials for making city resilience. And I'll be breaking the presentation down in basically 4 blocks. One, I'll introduce to you about this scorecard, what it is, how it's linked to the 10 essentials, how you can apply it to your regular work to make sure that your city is improving your resilience planning. Now we're gonna go to the break after this short presentation about the scorecard. We'll come back and we'll have an interactive exercise to go through some of the questions of the scorecard for you to get some exposure and be able to practice using the tool. I will also be introducing to you a lot of case examples from other cities around the world that has been applying this tool to help them improve their resilience planning and understand what risk reduction activities they should continue to do and create the collaboration with different stakeholders in the city level. And then we're going to end the sessions today with some pop quiz. So just stay tuned throughout the sessions. We'll have about 10 questions in the quiz, just for you to also be able to capture the key takeaway from the 3 hours of this session 3 of the training. So yes, so when we're talking about disaster resilience scorecard for cities, we actually give it a nickname as a scorecard. It's basically a set of assessments that contain a lot of the questions and indicators that would allow the cities to be able to assess the resilience progress against this 10 essentials for making city resilience. So in simple words, it's a tool that you do self-ask within the cities to reflect how far you have gone against this 10 essentials, and be able to use that to understand your baseline, and then be able to extract and understand some of the gaps areas, and be able to list out a key list of activities that you can do to be able to improve your resilience in all these 10 dimensions of how you can make your city resilient. There are many sets of the indicators that have been developed in the past, but this current set of the scorecard, as you can see on the screen, was launched in 2017, and it was developed in collaboration with the private sector, IBM, AECOM. You may have heard of them. They are the engineering consulting companies that also have vast consulting experience. They have helped to capture and customize these indicators that is mapped 100% against the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. So if you are the city, if you are the local governments authorities, you can actually use these sets of questions to be able to tap the progress against the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. And it really helps you to foster different dialogues with a lot of the sectoral development agencies within your cities, create a lot of the collaboration with the stakeholders within the cities, and be able to take the collaborative approach to improving your planning and implementation on disaster risk reduction and resilience building. There are many versions of the scorecard that we have available. Dasha has already kindly dropped the link on how you can access this scorecard set. So the first version that we have is the PDF version. Basically, you can print it out. It's a booklet that contains all descriptions, explanation about what the disaster resilience scorecard for city is all about, a set of indicators, how you can use the tools, and etc. We also have the Excel tool version, which converts all of this narrative into the working Excel tool that you can use as a tool with the multi-stakeholders participation in a workshop style to do the scoring. And the tool will give you the interactive result of how you score and be able to capture the process. A lot of decision makers can use these pictograms of your analysis in improving and identifying the area of improvement and use it in your planning process. Latest version of the scorecard, which was only launched this year in May 2022, is the online version. So it's the enhanced version of the Excel tool that everyone who has the account, create the account and get access to this online version can do the assessment all together at the same time. So it really facilitates all of the society, all of the cities approach to doing the scorecard together. It also gives the interactive results, similarly to how the Excel tool provides. It also allows you to print the report. And moreover, you can actually publish this assessment for other cities and other partners within who are interested to learn about your progress, and you can demonstrate that you have actually completed this assessment. There are also different links. One is the scorecard.undr.org, which is the actual website that you can do the online scorecard assessment. If you're going to use it for your training or just practice the use, there's scorecard-training.undr.org that you can use, and any information stored on this training platform is not necessarily the real information that you are using to assess your city. It's a practice platform that you can get familiarized with how the tool is used. If you are from academia, you want to use it in your education programs, feel free to use that as well. And we also have developed the FAQ, frequently asked questions, about how to use the scorecard online version particularly. So you just click on the link that is on the last line of the slide. And of course, we'll be sharing with you this presentation so you can have access much easier on these links in the future. Now you may wonder what's inside the scorecard. I'll be using now the example from the Excel tool. When you open the Excel tool, the scorecard Excel tool, you'll see this cover page that also have a lot of buttons, the circle buttons that you can click. There are pages that you can go to start fill in your city information. There are pages at the bottom, the circles in the bottom. You can click to go to see the questions in all of the 10 essentials. There are also the shortcut to go to the result page and to reset all data and to see more information about the scorecard. Now, when you click to see the indicators in the essential, there are this example of the questions that I would want to highlight. So if you go to essential one of the example of the indicators included in this scorecard set will ask you about plan making. The question will be framed very simply. Does a city master plan or equivalent plan include or implement disaster risk reduction approaches in line with the Sendai framework? You are allowed to score between 0 to 3. If you don't have any plan at all that deal with disaster risk reduction in your cities, then obviously you can score 0, that you don't have any plans. But if you are somewhere in between, you have some plan, maybe it also covers maybe emergency response primarily. It doesn't yet address some other aspect of 10 essential, for example, the urban development design, or it doesn't address the nature-based solution, etc. You may consider scoring it 1, that you have the plan that offers some partial compliance to the Sendai framework that covers some aspects of the 10 essentials. If you actually have the plan that address all of the 10 essential, but it's a standalone, it's not integrated in any other of the urban development plans in the cities, you can have the choice to score it 2, that yes, the city has a standalone DRR plan complying to the Sendai framework and addressing all of the 10 essentials. But if you are the cities that have the super comprehensive plan that address all aspects of the 10 essentials, and the plan is not a standalone, it's integrated into other urban development plans, other sectoral development plans, then you may decide to score 3. So by having this kind of indicators and allowing you to score between 0 to 3, it helps you to reflect the current stage of your city progress on this disaster risk reduction implementation. If you scoring 3 in this indicator, then bravo, you are on the right track to making sure that your city is becoming resilient. But if you are not scoring at full score, maybe 2, 1, or 0, it also means that there is some room of improvement that you can continue to work on, how you can make sure that your plan is becoming more comprehensive and address all 10 aspects of the making city resilient essentials, right? Now in the scorecard itself, you will see this kind of template. You'll see first on the top left-hand corner, the questions and also the elaborated explanation of what the question is about. There's also a comment box on the top right-hand corner that may capture a little bit more of the explanations on the definitions and how you may interpret the questions in your local context. The important areas I want to highlight here is number 1, where I highlight is where your response between 0, 1, 2, or 3. Number 2 is an empty box where I would encourage, we encourage the users to also provide the means of verification of why you score it that way. If you're scoring 1, give us explanation. Maybe you have the plan, some plan in place. What are the plan? What's the name of the plans? Whether it's developed in what year, complying in which legal framework within your country or your municipality. And address also if the plan is addressing particularly certain priorities against the 10 essentials, or there are certain gap areas that you feel that the plan is not comprehensive enough and still needs some more improvement to be able to make it more comprehensive. There are also areas in the bottom where you can also now identify if you are not scoring full and you have seen some room for improvement, what could be the potential actions that some of your city stakeholders can take, whether it be city council, whether it be any other people, sectoral departments in your cities that should take the actions to make sure that you continue to improve on this scoring in the future. You will also identify both the actions, the responsible institution, as well as set the time scale of when you want this action to be completed. Right? The scorecard questions are rather flexible, and we also allow and encourage the cities also to reflect and interpret the questions. So it makes sure that it's really matched your local context. There will be some questions that may or may not match to your local context. So it's very important that you also discuss within your city stakeholders when you run the scorecard assessment, how you interpret the questions and provide such justification and explanation also in the box of the means of verification. I do emphasize it's very important that we provide the means of verification because there are a lot of questions in this assessment and you would want to capture what kind of debate and discussion you have had with the stakeholders, because otherwise when you come back to the questions, you really forgot really like why you scored that way, and it would be more difficult for you to identify useful actions to move forward if you don't really have the understanding what make the baseline the reality. The scorecard also will provide you with this sets of analysis result at the very end, and you will see here the gray area in the scorecard pictogram is actually giving you the potential maximum score that you can do and you can achieve from the scoring of the scorecard. It's going by the raw scoring, it's not by percentage. So we'll see the disparity in the shape of the spider web. And the blue is actually the actual score of how the city is doing. The more blue area you see in the pictogram, it means the more progress you are doing against that essentials. So let's say in this case of the example of how the city is doing in this assessment. So you will see that in this assessment, the city score full in essential 1. So you'll see the blue area stretching from the center of the spider web up to the maximum of the age of essential 1. This means that the city is actually scored perfectly on essential 1, organizing for resilience. They have a well-equipped plan. They have the agency that do coordination on resilience planning and implementation. But at the same time, if you switch to see essential 3, there are a lot of gray areas in between here. So it means that the city is not doing so well in essential 3 on financing for resilience. So by understanding this spider web diagram, the city will be able to see what are the critical areas out of the 10 essentials that the city is doing very well. What are the strengths that they have? But at the same time, the more gray areas you have, it also shows the area of weaknesses, area of potential improvements that your city can do to make sure that you progress further on your resilience building initiative and commitment. Okay. The scorecard also will give you the pictogram per essential. And as I described earlier, so you can see in this example that if you go through the breakdown of essential 1 questions, the city really score full in all the 3 questions. You get the perfect blue area here. But in essential 2 on understanding risk, the city score well on perfect on question number 2 and question number 3 of the essential 2. But scoring 2 in the remaining 3 questions. So in this case, and they can also take a look and see, okay, what are the questions in 2.1? Okay, 2.1 is talking about whether the city have the knowledge on the hazard that the city faces and the likelihood of the occurrence. Essential 2.4 also talking about whether the city understand the cascading impact of different hazards that can happen in the cities and what could be the cascading failures of different other infrastructures and anything in the cities. So this also show how you can look at what could be the potential action. So in this case, it could be that you are looking further into doing a little bit more of the risk analysis to be able to understand, conduct maybe an assessment of what could be the potential cascading impact of different hazards that may happen in your city, right? Now, moving to essential 3, you also see it's almost blank, very little blue area. So it shows that the city have very little knowledge and progress in terms of finding for resilience. You can also take a look at the questions and see, okay, which area you score little and what could be the actions you can identify to continue to improve on this spectrum. The Excel tool also allow you to download the reports, which are including both the raw scoring and explanation, as well as the pictogram of the overall analysis that you can use for your decision-making planning process and also guiding your implementation. There are the benefits of using the scorecard. First of all, we do encourage that the scorecard assessment is not being done by only one person in the city. We do encourage this be conducted in the workshop style, that you bring in a lot of the city stakeholders, you bring in representation of your complex system. You know, Sanjay has shown you this mapping of the complex nature of the city, of the system of systems of the city. So you should be bringing, for example, the representative of the city council, representative of the health department, education department, water, sanitization, financing, accounting departments, those who are responsible for urban development planning, those who are working on environmental issues, those from schools, those from like many other sectors in the cities, to go through these indicators together to help establish common sets of the baseline measurements of your city progress. And by doing and running through this kind of questions, it helps you to create the awareness among different stakeholders in the cities of what are disaster risk reduction essentials that you should be caring about within the cities. It helps to also open the dialogue and understanding of how different sectors of the city actually have responsibility and can influence how you can drive risk reduction, or in some action, you might not know that your action can add disaster risk to the cities. But by bringing these people into the same assessment exercise, it helped them to create the awareness and really understand that their action can really matter and help the city to reduce the risk. And of course, by running through this exercise together, you have the consensus of what are your current state of the resilience progress, and be able to use that to identify the actions, to develop the resilience strategies, to identify the disaster risk reduction actions, and also lead to the collaborative actions to implement in the future. There are actually different versions of the preliminary assessment of the scorecard assessment. In this exercise after the break, I will be using the preliminary assessment as a teaser for you to be able to get some exposure of what type of questions are available. In this preliminary assessment, it contains 47 indicators with the scoring between 0 to 3, similarly to how I provided the example just now. It's recommended that the cities who are very new to the disaster risk reduction and resilience space start off using this preliminary assessment versions to run through all the indicators, create the basic understanding of where your gaps are, and collaborations, status to create the collaboration between different stakeholders in the process. There are also the detailed assessment that are more detailed, as the name suggests. There are 117 indicators, and the grading, the scoring goes from 0 to 3 to 0 to 5. And it could take months to complete the assessment. So some of the cities that run already the preliminary assessment do not need to go through the whole comprehensive 117 questions. You may pick and choose the essentials that you feel that you want to deep dive into understanding more of what action you should do and create the improvement. There is also a special set addendum annexed to the city scorecard, which is this one in the blue cover on screen, is the public health system resilience addendum. It has only 23 questions that focus purely on making sure the cities does integrate the public health aspect in all of the 10 essentials. So in the organizing for resilience, to make sure the public health departments also represented in the planning process, and making sure that the public health, the pandemic, for example, the COVID risk, are also embedded in how the city is understanding risk and be able to use the risk in a comprehensive planning. There are also many addendums in the making that the city could benefit on this, and we'll be leaving you the link on how to you can get access and be to read the guides about these different indicator questions. I will be moving in the next section after the break to go through some of the example of the indicators from the preliminary assessment. So for now, I'll just give you this teaser for you to understand a little bit of what the scorecard is about. And we'll give you, Dasha, should we give the participant about 10 to 15 minutes break before we go into the exercise?
Thank you very much, Mai, for your presentation. And yes, I would suggest that we have a 10-minute break. So 10 minutes exactly, and then we will resume and proceed with the exercise and the rest of our activities.
Yes.
I haven't seen any questions yet, but you are all very welcome to post them in the chat during the break or after, and we will take time to respond to them. Thank you very much, and see you after the break.
Yeah, so let's make sure that we are back at 3:35. That's my clock.
35.
Yeah, so 3:35. See you back, and we'll start off with the exercise for you to go through. Thank you. Hello again, everyone. I hope you are back from the coffee break.
Yes.
Yes, I see some movement. So what we're going to be doing from now is to go on to the exercise. So you'll have to get your hands a bit active and respond to some of the questions and stuff that I'll be feeding to you. Let me again share my screen. Today, we're going to be using a different program software called Slido. I think you guys were familiar now with the Mentimeters, but today we'll be using Slido instead. So just want to make sure that everyone can get access to it. We're going to have a little bit of the simple question just to get you to familiarize yourself with the system. So here, you can join the exercise by typing slido.com and put the password UNDRR. Or you can scan the QR code with your mobile phone with the QR code that is shown on the screen. Once you are in, you will see the first question that I have here. Which country, wait a minute. Which country are you from? So if you are now back to your computer, you see my screen. You can log in with the browser, slido.com, put in the password UNDRR, or you can scan the QR code with your mobile phone. And again, type in UNDRR as the password. Now let's practice. Which country are you from? Just basically type the name of the country you're from. Lovely, I started to see, you can see on the top right, we get 16 participants joining already, 17, 18. Yes, let's keep the number coming. We have about 100 odd participants in this training at the moment. Let's see how many are with us now and take the active participation in the exercise. 26 people. We have a lot of participants coming from the Philippines. Right there, we also have participants from Nepal, Cambodia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, from Korea, from Fiji. Did I miss any? Sri Lanka, India. We now have 31 people joining the exercise. If you just come back to your computer now, just log on to the browser slido.com, put UNDRR as the password, or scan the QR code from your mobile phone. Yes, we have a lot of the Filipinos colleagues here. We also have participants from Fiji. Oh, we also have someone from Uganda. Okay, 38 people. Let's try to get a little bit more before we move on to the next questions. If you have just come back to your seats, just scan the QR code with your mobile phone or log into the browser slido.com. I will have more people coming from Bangladesh, from Colombia. Oh, no, sorry, not Colombia, Cambodia. From Pakistan. Lovely. Now we get more than 40 people. So let's try to move on to the next question. Still a warm-up question. Now I would like to see which city you are from. So basically just type the name of your city. Here we see Omok from the Philippines. City name, please, not the country name. Let's put the city name. Yes, Kathmandu. We have Quezon cities. Oh, we have a lot of the cities from the Philippines. Phnom Penh. We have from Incheon, from Manila, Cebu. Wow, that's a lot of people from different cities around the, well, mostly in the region. From Suva, from Fiji. Lovely. So I think now you kind of get a hang of how you can use Slido. So For those who just joined, use your mobile phone to scan this QR code on the screen. Type UNDR as the password, or if you can, if you're using your laptop, you can also log in a browser, slido.com, and type in UNDR as the password. Lovely. So I think now everyone get a hang of how to use this Slido. So now in the next slides, I will be bringing you the questions, sample questions from the scorecard preliminary version. I'll have 10 questions in total, one from each of the essentials. So let's take a look. Now we have like almost 50 active participants here, so very good. So let's move on to the first question. This first question is taken from Essential 1 on organizing for resilience. So the question is focusing on organization, coordination, and participation. Is there a multi-agency or sectoral mechanism with appropriate authority and resources to address disaster risk reduction in your city? You can score between 0 to 3. If you have all lead agency teams are well established, you have properly resourced and with proper authority to act across all DRR stages, score 3. If you have all lead agencies team well established, but proper resources with authority to act, but there's some inconsistency in the resourcing across these DRR stages, meaning maybe more on emergency response, but less on preventative measures and stuff, you can score 2. If you have the city teams that have authority, convening power, but do not have the proper interagency coordination mechanism and are under-resourced, you can score 1. Or if lead agencies lack proper authority and are under-resourced in your city, you can score 0. Right, so let's see between 0 to 3, what you think your city is at in terms of organization, coordination, and participation. We now see more than half of the participants here are scoring number 2. What does it mean? So let's take an assumption of just visualization that all of you who are participating in this assessment are actually from the same cities. You are sitting in the same room. This is your personal opinions on how you are rating your cities against these questions on organization, coordination, and participation. You see there is the disparity. A lot of people are scoring 2, but there are some people who believe that the cities is perfectly having the well-equipped team, well-resourced, equipped resource, and also authority to act. There are also some people who feel that the team, you have the team, but they don't have the proper interagency support or coordination mechanism in place. So if you are visualizing this as the actual assessment in your cities, you would then have to now provide some justification why you are scoring 2, why you're scoring 1, why you're scoring 3, why you're scoring 0. And by having this kind of exchanges of the information with different people who are sitting in this room, you may have come up to the conclusion that is validated by all city stakeholders that your city is now perhaps in scoring 2, that you have the well resources, authority to act team and be able to coordinate, but still not so much resources available in all of the DR stages. Right, so if you have like this kind of exercise done in the cities, then you will see that you can come to a bit of a more conclusive idea of where your actual baseline of the city is. Right, lovely. So in this kind of exercise, there's no right or wrong answer. It's reflecting your opinion about what your city is progressing, and you have to debate with your colleagues why you're scoring that way and come up with the conclusion as a city response on this. So let's try to take a look at the next question. We'll move on to get you exposed to these different sets of questions of the scorecard. So this question is taken from Essential 2 on using the risk information in your planning. So the question 2.4 is focusing on cascading impacts. is there a collective understanding of potentially cascading failures between different city and infrastructure systems under different scenarios? So basically, does your city understand that if flood happens, what could happen, whether like some part of the city will be inundated, if that part of the city is inundated, whether some of your infrastructure will withheld, whether the water sanitization system is going to operate, whether communication tower is going to still be intact, whether the hospital who should be taking care of the impacted patients are still operative, right? Or what about if there are earthquakes happening? What about if there are landslides happening? What about if there are earthquakes happening on top of the pandemic scenarios? What could be this connecting, cascading failure, series of failures of your city infrastructure and other of the service systems? You also have ability to score between 0 to 3. If you don't have any understanding at all of what potential cascading impacts may be, you can score score 0. If you have some understanding of some of this disaster scenario, maybe in this case, you understand cascading impact for floods. You may have understanding of cascading impact for earthquake, but you may not have a complete picture of the potential cascading impacts in case both flood and earthquake or pandemic happen at the same time. Maybe you can score 1, right? If you have a complete, relatively complete collective understanding on majority of the scenarios you have in the cities, then you can score 2. And if you have relatively complete understanding every scenarios you have in the cities, maybe you score 3. Right, so try to reflect. Does your city understand? By saying cities is also like the citizens, the government structures, whether you have the risk information to understand these potential cascading failures. Right, so now we see there are a little bit of the close scoring between 1 and 2, about 40-something%. Right, so if this happens also in the case when you are doing the assessment in your cities, then you have to have a very good debate among the stakeholders to decide whether your city will score 1 or 2. Why? What are the rationales? You can cite also what scenarios you already know, what scenarios you don't know about this cascading impact. You may be able to cite also that you have understanding of cascading impact on health, on education, but you may not have enough information on the impact that could have on communication, transportation system, or etc. Right? So jot those down, make it as part of your justification in the exercise. So again, in this question, we see that, oh, your cities have pretty much some understanding about cascading impacts. You score between 1 or 2, so there are some progress already happening, and there may be some more rooms of further improvement. Now let's move to the third question. Of course, third question also comes from Essential 3 on financing for resilience. So this question is focusing on whether the city or lead agency understand all sources of funding and the resilience evidence. And the understanding of well-connected, you understand all available routes that you can attract the external funding, and you can find like where these funding sources are. Right? If you don't have or little understanding or awareness about available sources of funding of DRR, you score 0. If the city understands all possible routes of secure funding for disaster risk reduction activity, and you also have some success of securing those fundings, then you score 3. If not, you score somewhere in between. Right? We have 22 people now participating in this question. So more than half of the participants feel that your city have some visibility of where the potential funding for DRR are, but you don't have the complete picture of where those sources are, and you don't really have a lot of initiative to pursue securing these funds for your DRR implementation. Okay. And from our study working, there are more than like 200 300 cities have used the scorecard, and we have actually ran the scorecard assessment comparative study out of all of these 200, 300 cities around the world. And this particular question also is one of the questions that the cities across the globe score relatively low on the scorecard assessment. So you are not alone if you feel that your city has only some visibility of routing of available funding. So now when you have like this kind of understanding of the current state, maybe the actions that you can put in for your further action is that you also have to have better knowledge on where the fundings are. There are also a lot of various financial access. It could be working through the national governments to create the national local funding mechanism. There could be also improvement of your local government capacity to attract some external donor. But a lot of times, even though you know that there are some external donor that have the funding available, you still have to improve your capacity in terms of preparing projects that have captured all of these needs and justification of why you need the funding for implementation. So running the scorecard is actually one step, make you one step closer to accessing the fund, because it helps you reflect the reality of the progress of how you are in terms of making the progress against the residence building. If you are able to provide a lot of justification that comes from the collaborative discussion with your city stakeholders, those are super valuable information that you could use to provide in your project proposal and make your project proposal much more solid to present to the donors, right? So that's a very good exercise to move forward. Lovely. So let's see, now moving to the fourth question. So now we are moving to the second set of the 10 essentials that focus on sectoral planning and integration of disaster risk reduction in different development sectors. Essential 4, question 4.4, focusing on urban development and design, particularly on the application of zoning, building codes, and standards. So the question is asking whether our zoning rules, building codes, and standards are widely applied and properly enforced and verified in your city. Does your city have the zoning rules, building codes, building standards, and moreover, not only having them available, but have them been used, enforced, and really actively verified within the city stakeholders, right? And by zoning rules, building codes, standards, also think of the complexity of different type of risk. Do you have the building codes for all of the potential hazards that may happen to your cities? Okay. Whether you have if your cities are prone to complex risk, earthquake, again, cyclone, drought, etc., floods, the building codes and land use zoning addressing all of these different hazard scenarios. Again, you have the ability to score between 0 to 3. And here we can see that more than half of the participants also see that the application of existing zones and buildings is partial or inconsistent within your cities. So now here, what would be very useful is that you have to think further, document further, what are the already available building codes and zoning regulations, perhaps worth looking at also at the year of when these zones and building codes were adopted, whether they have been obsoleted or need renewal, need to be relooked at, right? Whether these codes are applicable to all sort of different hazards in the city. If not, what are the hazards that's still lacking proper zoning and building codes? Right? This also gives you an urban development planning departments a lot of work to do already to rethink and replan about how to use the building codes. And you will need to understand risk to be able to adapt these building codes better to accommodate your risk reduction exercise. Right, lovely. So majority of the cities feel that the codes are partially inconsistent. Now let's move to question 5. focusing on nature-based solution, the use of the ecosystem protective function. Question 5.3 is asking whether the city is aware of ecosystem services that being provided to the city from the natural capital and beyond the administrative borders. Are the agreements in place with neighboring administration to support the protection and management of these assets? Right? We know that the normal administrative borders, it's not normally the same border as a lot of your ecosystems, right? You may have the forest, you may have the mangrove, you may have a lot of the green infrastructures, or the pond retention, waterways, etc., that run across from your administrative borders to your neighbor. And of course, if one neighbor acts something, it can have the implication on your particular areas of jurisdiction. And to be able to manage your risk reduction efforts well, you also have to make sure of the actions being taken by the neighboring jurisdiction, right? So if the city is aware of the importance of these natural capitals beyond your own administrative borders and has plans in place with the neighboring administrations to support the protection and management of these assets, then of course you can score 3. If somewhere in between, you can score 2, 1, or 0. If you have little or no awareness, then it will be 0. It's very interesting here that majority of the participants here score 2, and 1 is kind of like competing up and down a little bit, that your city is aware of the functions provided by natural capitals beyond your city administrative borders. And there have been some early discussions with neighboring administrations. Right? So you are already on a very good progress to acknowledge that this is something of need. So the next steps to be able to secure your risk reduction action with your neighbor is really to have some form of agreement and joint planning with your neighbors to see how you can enhance the protection and use these natural assets to help protect your cities against a lot of the hazards, right? Lovely. So let's move on to question 6. Question 6 is, of course, focusing on institutional capacity. There were some questions about that in earlier session when with Sanjay's presentation, right? So in this essential is focusing on your cities to reflect on how, particularly whether the institution have enough training in place to support the institutional capacity building. Question is simple. Are there training courses covering risk and resilience issue offered to all sectors of the cities, including government, business, NGOs, and communities? And when we say here, training courses, is not only just emergency drills. We are not talking about emergency drills or emergency operation management here. We're talking about training course that covering risk and resilience issues. So about disaster risk reduction, how different sectors can integrate disaster risk reduction in their planning and implementation and action. Whether all of your government, business, NGOs, communities understand what you could do pre-disaster, whether there are training courses to support them to understand different type of risk they were exposed to, and whether they can improve any sort of the governance mechanism, their capacity to deliver their services, to make sure the risk is reduced before disaster strikes. This is very interesting because you can see now we have the tying score 1, 2, and 3. So there are cities that have some modules available. There are some contents, sorry, I lost it. Some content needs to be significantly improved. There are also majority of the participants also feel that there are some track records of delivering of the resilience training for only some sectors. But there are also many sectors in the cities that have lacked training or engagement. There are also about 28-29% of the city's participants here that feel that there are training courses that are available within the cities that cover all aspects of risk resilience response offer across all of the sectors in the society. This is very impressive if your city are able to do that. Right. So here, when you're looking at this, of course, there are actually a lot of training modules available globally, and there are a lot of trainings available free of charge, like this training, particularly as an example, that we are offering for free of charge for all of your participation to understand what disaster risk reduction, to understand the use of different tools for the cities, the governments, business NGOs, and the citizens to be able to use to reduce risk. So now that you feel that the cities, now the majority of the participants feel that there are only some training modules, not covering all of the aspects needed and not available to all of the sectors, we do encourage you to also get access to all of these freely available trainings and capacity building promoted across your city stakeholders so that they'll also have access to this. This could be a kickstart of your activities. Very simple, no cost involved, just only time and resources. And by attending this type of trainings, many of the trainings here that we have are not only available free of charge, but you can actually use the materials to get replicated in the cities. So do feel free to also replicate these exercises, for example, with your city stakeholders to make sure that the trainings covering this risk and resilience issue are much more provided to all of the stakeholders in the city. Okay. Now let's move to question 7. It's talking about the societal capacity and how you can increase engagement. 7.4 focuses on citizen engagement techniques. It's asking how effective is a city at citizen engagement and communications in relation to disaster risk reduction. Engagement here is pretty much on communication. So score maximum 3 if you have engagement through a lot of the media channels, both social media, offline media, newspaper, mobile device, and you also collect the data from your citizens. So it's a two-way communication flow throughout the years to exchange on the information about risk, what you need to do on risk reduction. For participants, I would like to request you to mute all your microphone, please, if you accidentally had it unmute. Thank you. Yes, if your city has multiple media channels, you communicate, broadcast one way from the city to the citizen, but you don't collect any information back from the citizens, then you can score 2. If you have some channels, you semi-regular updates, you communicate only once in a while, maybe you score 1. If you have very poor, you don't feel, if you as a citizen don't feel that your city has been informing you anything about risk information, how you can prepare yourself, how you can protect yourself and make yourself more resilient, and you can score 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3. So here is very impressive that 50% and above of the participants attending this particular training feel that the cities is doing very active engagement of the citizens in the disaster risk reduction information, and also collect the data flow in crowdsourcing the information from the citizens for the feedback loop. This is really impressive, and I do encourage the cities to continue doing this practice. For the cities that have not yet been able to do that, maybe you can start to consider, I think a lot of cities now start to use a lot of social media as a mechanism to at least inform the public and get some feedback from the public on where the problems, where risk vulnerabilities within the city may be. Okay, so good job. Now let's move to question 8. So question 8 is focusing on infrastructure. Is the essential that has the most number of questions. So in this case, I think 7 or 9 question in essential 8. So in health, in 8.7 is focused on healthcare system. It's asking, would there be sufficient acute healthcare capacities to deal with expected major injuries in worst case scenarios? There are a lot of jargons in there. So in order to answer this question, you have to understand first what could be your worst case scenarios, right? So this is important for you to understand first what your risk is. So it's connected to essential 2 in terms of understanding risk, understanding the cascading impact of your whatever risk that may happen in the cities. Imagine, visualize what could be your worst case scenarios. And in those worst case scenarios, what would be the major injuries that could be surged from these scenarios? Score 3, if you feel that 90% and above of the major injuries in most severe scenarios can be treated within 6 hours, then less than that. Or if the treatment will be longer than 36 hours or no emergency healthcare capacity at all, then you score 0. Think also of the complex risk scenario, right? So your worst case scenario could be, I'm just citing, no, because we have been through COVID. Now we have COVID ongoing. We have a lot of encouragement for physical distancing. What if there are cyclone or earthquake happening on top of the pandemic that destroy the part of the cities? Whether your healthcare facility can withstand that kind of cyclone or earthquake, whether your healthcare facilities will be able to cater extra injuries that come from those earthquake, cyclone, on top of how you are exercising the physical distancing during the pandemic. Whether those major injuries that happen will be treated within 36 hours, that would impact the way that you answer this question. Okay. So I think majority of the participants reflect that majority of the injuries, above 90%, in the most severe scenarios will be treated within 36 hours. So that's a day and a half. That's pretty good movement. Now you can also think further. If you are not able to provide the services within 36 hours, whether you can do some sort of agreement, making support, dialogue and create a collaboration with the neighboring cities and their healthcare facilities, for example, to help shorten the time of the treatment, whether you have the backup resource. Right. So this kind of question also help you to reflect a little bit more on why you think that you can treat the patient within 36 hours and what could have been done better to reduce that gap time of 1.5 days to lesser. Right. In this Essential 8, there are also many similar questions, not only on healthcare, but also on education, on communication, transportation, energy sector, water and sanitization, etc. So it really gives the equal opportunity for different sectors within the cities to reflect your progress against disaster risk reduction using this scorecard exercise. 2 more questions. So let's move to the next question. Question 9.1 from Essential 9, focusing on response management, focusing on early warning. Does the city have a plan or standard operating procedure to act on early warning or forecasts? What proportion of the population is reachable by early warning system? Estimation of over 90% of the population is reachable by the early warning system. Then you score 3. That's also called last mile, end-to-end early warning system. You get the majority of the population covered by your messages. 75%, then you score 2. If about more than half is reached, then score 1. If less than half of the population can be reached by your early warning systems, and you score 0. So it's interesting to see also that there are a mixture of the response in these questions, right? Some reflected, no, it's not reachable. Then you also should reflect like, okay, what could then be the early warning channel and media used to be able to increase the reach to the population, right? If you already have reached out to 50% or 75%, you can also think further of what else you could do to enhance the number of the coverage to be more than 90%. So here again, you'll see in this case, 41 people participate in these questions. You get a tie between 2 and 3. It's a very close call, right? So in the actual assessment, your city stakeholders will have to provide justification why you think it's more than 75%, but why something is more than 90%. Give out all the evidence, the factual information about your reflection, so that the subjectivity of the assessment gets toned down to become more objectively based on the evidence that you provide in the exchange of the conversation. Good job. So now we are moving to the next question, which is the last question on this scorecard exercise sample, which is question 10.2, coming from essential 10 on build back better. It's focusing on lesson learned and lesson loops. Do post-event assessment process incorporate failure analysis and the ability to capture lesson learned that then feed into the design and delivery of the rebuilding of the projects. Basically, whether your city learned from the failure of how you of the previous disaster, you take the lesson learned, embed all those lesson learned in how you prepare for your recovery, rebuilding projects. Okay. Now it's also the same here. You can also take the COVID-19 situation as the reflection. Do we learn from how we have been suffering from the last 2.5 years of the pandemic? Why we suffered, why we couldn't continue our economic activities during this 2.5 years, right? What was the loophole? Are these loopholes being now addressed in the way you are now continuing running the city? It could be from not only the building design, but it could also be economic activities. It could be also the provisions of the healthcare access, provision of the risk information communication. It can be anything that related to your experience in the previous pandemic, whether those have been embedded and you see the improvement on how the city is running your cities now. Are we living well with COVID now? Right. So if your lessons are not captured, is ad hoc, relied on individuals' interests, you 0, score 0. If you have some lesson captured, disseminated, but it's not a systematic way, so there are still loopholes, you score 1. And I think majority of participants also reflecting it in this way. If your city demonstrates clear processes also in place to capture the lessons and failures from past events, and feed those lessons into the design and delivery of the improvement, then you can score 2. Okay. If there are, if you have like super effective systematic mechanism to make sure that you do the after action review, you do the post event failure reflection of the lesson learned, and always capture those lessons learned to feed into how you are rebuilding the projects, then you score 3. Right? Surprisingly, a lot of us have been facing disaster or disaster risk in the past decades, but many of the times our governments, both national and cities, also may fail to capture the lesson learned, integrated that in a systematic way. So while we are trying to also do disaster risk reduction pre-event, do not forget that you should also continue to build back better by learning through these lessons. And so we can see from this exercise that there are still a lot of room for improvement, even in the recovery period that we are facing now. Yep. So these are basically the exposure, like the glimpse of the 10 questions that are in the 47 indicators of the preliminary assessment. So I hope that you now get the sense of the type of questions that are in all of these 10 essentials across, and how you can reflect the progress against the 10 essentials and be able to identify potential gaps and use it in the way that you can improve the planning, right? So if you have questions or anything, just make sure that you continue to drop it in the chat box, and we'll be coming to address that at the end of the sessions today, right? I hope you kind of enjoy this exercise, I just want to highlight to you in the next section of my presentation, the case examples from other cities around the world in using this scorecard assessment in reality. Okay. As I mentioned, the scorecard actually has been used by a lot of the cities around the world, both developed countries and also in developing countries. I'll give you the mixture of how the city have been using the scorecard, what process they have used the scorecard. So there are also disparity between how the scorecard is applied. So in this case, first case here is from Lisbon, that they used the disaster resilience scorecard for city to help them to understand the progress against the 10 essential. You can see on the right part of the graph that the data on 2015 is on the left side. They ran the scorecard against the 10 essentials, and they also have identified that the 4 essentials that score under 4.0, they would give that an emphasis and put in as a strategy for the 5 urban development planning cycle, 5-year urban development planning cycles. So in this case, the city has been focusing on essential 3, financing capacity, essential 6 on capacity of the institution, essential 2 on understanding risk scenarios, and also essential 9 on improving the emergency response. By doing and having this understanding, they also identified the list of the actions they could do to address these gaps, and also package some of this action into projects. So they have identified, I think, about 6 to 10 projects that captured different actions that contribute to this 10 essential that I had done the assessment. They also have identified what the key objectives of these projects are, who would be the lead agencies taking the activities forward, what would be the duration, and what are the estimated funding needed, both internally by their local government financing, tax revenue, etc., and also the external investment that may be needed. They also did the mapping of what are the sectors actually the primary target of these projects. And by doing this, it really helped them to improve the way that they can create the project proposal. And again, give a lot of justification, a lot of background information on the current progress, the needs, the consensus, the collaboration of different stakeholders in the project development, and hence be able to increase the ability to access the finance from the external donor as well. Now here the example is taken from the Americas. From Honduras, the city called Tegucigalpa also ran similarly to how Lisbon was doing. So they ran the scorecard assessment in a series. I think this one was 2017, 2018-ish. It was led by the mayor's office. And the mayor's office brought in 14 different local departments within the cities, including also the invitation of the national government entities for to observe and also to be able to understand the type of the local government's issues, particularly when it talks about legal framework or when they talk about infrastructure mechanism and services available. It's not only the cities that own those are not the ownership of these elements within the cities, and they need collaboration from the national government, from the private sectors, and etc. And so they bring in these different stakeholders into the same loop and created this active process of running scorecard, ranging to about like 6 months, starting from orientating all of these stakeholders about what disaster risk reduction is all about. They started to run the preliminary scorecard assessment, and they also jumped into running again the detailed scorecard assessment to re-emphasize on and identify the different actions they could do to improve risk reduction. Then they package it, understand, like you can see the very funky diagram on the right. What it shows here is that from the right-hand corner on the pink bar is the 10 essentials. And then include the 47 indicators from the preliminary assessment, and they identified the actions that they could do to address these gaps. Then they bundle them into 4 strategic pillars The yellow one addressing about organizing for the governance structure within the city. So it tackles essential one on planning coordination mechanism. It also tackles essential 4 in terms of integrating the planning mechanism, urban development designs into the governance systems. They're also addressing the societal capacity. They're also addressing how they can improve the institution capacity in this pillar, as well as the coordination mechanism, not only on pre-disaster, but during disaster response and also recovery. They extract also in green, focusing particularly on finance, improving finance for the cities. Essential C on creating, 3 on the blue one, in creating the space of the integration of different elements of the cities, from understanding risk, from the use of the urban development designs, in the integration of the institution and engagement of private sectors and citizens, into making sure that they are the comprehensive space in integrating risk reduction into different sectoral and private sectors planning mechanism. And then the last one is focused on improving the infrastructure resilience, that tackle on particular essential 8 and 9 of this scorecard assessment, right? So from this process, they were able to extract these 4 strategic pillars, as I mentioned, and form the municipal policy for integrated disaster risk, this risk management plan for the cities. And because the process was multi-stakeholder engagement, and it was very easy for them to actually present that to the city council and get the validation, get the endorsement for the plan to be implemented, and starting to get the funding for the implementation by different agencies identified through the planning mechanism. We also have similar processes running in Guayaquil in Ecuador. They have like this big stakeholder forums running the scorecard assessment, validating also the scorecard assessment, agree on the result, and then develop that into the planning that get endorsed by the city council and implemented late by the city mayor. In Asia, we also have run the scorecard in various cities around the region. In Mongolia, is an exceptional case that is led by the national governments of the Mongolia, particularly National Emergency Management Agency, or NEMA, that was the trainer of this similar training program. They were exposed to the scorecard, they were exposed to disaster risk reduction training, and they decided to take the lead in translating all of the materials, available trainings, the scorecard inclusive, into Mongolian languages. And they did the orientation for all of the IMAX or the provinces within Mongolia to understand how to run the scorecard. They led the cities to run the scorecard. And they were one of the first countries around the world that all of the IMAX and provinces around the country have used a scorecard in identifying the strength and the gap area. So the first assessment was done in around like 2018, 2019. And interestingly, just this past year in 2021, NEMA rerun the scorecard for the second time and did the comparison between the scoring that all of the IMAX did 3 years ago and this last past year, to see where the cities have improved over the 2 years and what could be the area of potential improvement further in the year to come. So this really helped to strengthen the connection between the national government and the local government authorities, and provide the national government clear guidance on how they can allocate the resource and the capacity support for the local governments in improving disaster risk reduction. Okay. We also have run this in Indonesia, in Myanmar, and Fiji. There are also some cities that voluntarily adopted scorecard assessment in the Philippines, for example. We also have started to see the city using the online scorecard assessment and created assessment report using the online version. Now, in contrast of using fully online version where you need to have the internet connection, in the case of Fiji and Nadi in Fiji, and you see on the slides, they use flip charts. So instead of running this using the computer, heavily computer-based, internet-based, or rely on this connection, the facilitator run through the scorecard questions, put up the flip chart with the table between scoring 0 to 3, and give out the sticker to all the participants in the room. Then ask each of the individuals to reflect what they think are the scoring pertaining each of the indicators that go through, and each individual gets to reflect. Now you will see that some questions in the green dots, there are more consensus, everything kind of like lumped into a very nice circle. So you can kind of automatically get the validation of the assessment right away. But if you can see from the left side, in the orange dots, there are also disparity between scoring. Some score 0, some score 2, some score 1, no one score 3, right? So in this kind of scenarios, then the facilitator would be able to now probe more for the cities, for the responders to reflect why they score 1, why they score 2, why they score 0, and allow the city stakeholders to debate and derive the conclusions of what could be the reflective scoring for the cities. And in that case, the circle that they have marked on the flip charts are reflecting the final score of the cities. So in this way, it also helps the cities to be able to develop the baseline assessment using the scorecard, even though they don't have to rely on the internet connection all the time. Right? And yeah, and similar exercise also were run in Africa, in Arab states. This also in Arab state case, it was also facilitated not by the national government, but by the academia. So the university actually helped to run the orientation, help them to also connect with private sectors and many other stakeholders within the cities, and help the cities to package the assessment into different projects proposal that can be used right away for the donor application, right? So there are rooms on how different stakeholders can actually use this scorecard to help the cities to develop the baseline assessment. So all in all, we also have this publication in blue cover with the link here that captured the lessons of a lot of cities around the world that have used the scorecard assessment in improving the way that they plan to identify the disaster risk reduction strategies. And we get the anonymous feedback that the scorecard is pretty much user-friendly, it's flexible, it's customizable, you can contextualize it to your local context, and it's a very good point of entry to engage with different stakeholders, non-traditional partners in your cities on disaster risk reduction. It has a very strong convening power that help you to create a dialogue and start to implement disaster risk reduction together with your colleagues. It also provides the immediate result of understanding your current progress, validated by the understanding of different stakeholders in the room, and be able to use that to improve your planning mechanism. Now, we really encourage the scorecard, once again, to be used in the workshop approach. It shouldn't be done by one person, because you can see in the sample questions I showed that there's no way that one person in the cities would have all information available to be able to do the assessment, right? And the more people, key stakeholders you are able to bring in the assessment, it will help to reflect the reality. It will help making the subjectivity of the scorecard assessment down to be more tangible based on the evidence provided by the experts in the room, right? It also helps you to get the consensus and agreement from these different stakeholders, allowing you to move forward into the comprehensive collaborative approach to your planning and implementation, right? You will also see that the result of assessment will be limited by the discussion and experience of the resource persons in the room. So it's very, very important that you bring the right person, you bring the right stakeholders into the assessment exercise, so that you make sure that the assessment result is reflecting the reality of your city. Now, it's not important how much you score, whether you score high or score low on the scorecard. It is very important that your scoring reflect your reality of how your city is doing. Because if you are scoring high, but it's superficial, it doesn't reflect your reality, you do miss the opportunity to create this multi-stakeholder engagement. You miss the opportunity to think of the potential actions and take really concrete actions to move your risk reduction agenda forward. Right. So it's really important that you actually keep the assessment the most realistic, because it's also help you to reflect your needs, your gaps that can be very useful when you develop the proposal to secure funding for any development projects that would help you to reduce vulnerability and risk of the city. Right. So again, I would recommend that you ensure that the representation of these stakeholders are represented in your scorecard assessment process. It's very needful. It's really great if the mayors or the city councils or the city stakeholders, like the mayor's office, will be the lead in this scorecard assessment, because they have the mandate also to coordinate with different stakeholders, and it will create a citywide commitment to move beyond emergency response to addressing different type of risk reduction angle, right? And it will be very useful in case your city doesn't speak English as the first language, and you have this translated into your local context. You have some orientation of the terminology on disaster risk reduction. The good thing is that we have about 18 or 19 languages already translated for this scorecard. So if you click the link that we provided earlier on in the session, we can drop the link again on the scorecard. You will find that there are a lot of the different languages available for the use of the scorecard. So feel free to get your hands on this materials. It's free to use. And if you feel that you have the limitation in engaging with the NGOs, private sectors, do not forget to use your university or academia within your city as the bridge to help to run the assessment. Or if you are the external agency helping the city to run the scorecard assessment, I would encourage you to remember your role as a facilitator to help to facilitate the dialogue and discussion by the city stakeholders, because the city stakeholders knows the information much more than external persons. So if the more that we can retain our role as a facilitator, it will be more beneficial for the city in this scorecard assessment process. Now, we also have seen that when scorecard assessment is run in the larger size cities, they tend to have much more ownership in the process because of the capacity, the understanding, the level of the resource available. But if this is run with the smaller size cities, there may be external and continuous support needed by the external agency, which in this case, the academia in your city can be a very useful players to help you, your city to run the scorecard assessment. Yep. So so that's it for my presentation for the time being. I want to give the floor back to Dasha before we move to the end of the session quiz. So back to you, Dasha.
Thank you very much, Mai. So we have a few minutes now for questions. If any. I've seen already one or two posted in the chat. Please feel free to post them in the chat or raise your hand.
Yes, and I have seen the question personally come to me to ask for the link for scorecard access. So I'm dropping you the link here in the chat box. So just click on the link to see there are a lot of languages available. If you're interested to translate in your language, and if it's not yet available there, just feel free to contact me. Also, we'll be happy to work with you to get the tools available in your language. And we also recruit volunteers in case anyone would want to translate this in your local language as well.
So I've sent you one question that had appeared. What happens if what happens if our subjective assessment scoring falls short of the verification? Will the justification affect the scores? Some stakeholders may be more conservative, while others may feel a higher score could be given in a specific indicator.
Yes, so this is particularly why I keep emphasizing that providing the means of verification is really helpful in this case, because of course there will be the scorecard itself, the way that it's structured is really subjective based on your interpretation, right? And we actually did have like the case scenario when we ran the scorecard, and we had two tables. One was like the city management officers, and the other were basically like the practitioners in different departments. Now, with particularly same question, the city managers actually have the higher scoring because they want to demonstrate that they have made some progress in the city, right? But when we turn on to the other table, who are practitioners in the cities, they actually score much lesser. But when we run the scorecard in the workshop style, it actually helps the two groups to actually debate and get the consensus on why they actually scored that way. So in some form, there will still need to be some justification on why you score it that way, because otherwise, like, you know, it's out of the blue, you score 3, 2, 1, 0, but it doesn't mean anything in terms of moving forward, right? So of course, like if you have limited people joining the assessment and you have little justification evidence provide, maybe the scoring is only reflecting that limited justification, but not the full reality of the city, right? So it's recommended that in the process, either you make sure that you bring in more of the representative that has specific knowledge and evidence available to help increase the justification for that particular questions, or you may park the questions and put in the verification box that you have limited knowledge on this question and you still need to probe for more information from X and Y agencies, right? In that way, that it will help you to be able to bring down the subjectivity of that scoring, and make it a bit more what's called factual and reflecting reality. Of course, you will not get the perfect justification in the first trial, because it's really reflecting what you know from your experience, right? We also have the cities that have shared with us that in the first trial that they run the scorecard, they score, I give you a fictional number, let's say 70% of this particular question, right? Because they thought that this is the best justification they could provide. But then after they started to working on disaster risk reduction, they expand the understanding that actually disaster risk reduction goes beyond what they understood at the time when they ran the scorecard a few years back. So then when they rerun the scoring in the few years time, instead of scoring 70%, they score less to 60 or 50%, because now they realize that they have more information and understanding of how they can justify the scoring, right? So that also impact the scoring itself. But as I said, it's for us, it's not important whether it's the high score or low score. It's more important on how you feel that you can reflect the reality of the justification of scoring to make it more tangible and really be beneficial for you to use in your planning process. Yeah.
Thank you, Mai. There are many proposals to translate the scorecard.
Well, I'll more than welcome for the proposal to translate the scorecard. Yes.
So as Sanjay replied, if you translate, please share with us and we will have it validated and published, and we will acknowledge your contribution.
Yes, so I'll drop you my email address in the chat box. If anyone wants to start beginning the translation in your language, just do let me know, and I can supply you with the Word document and the original text that you can use on the translation language. Yeah.
There was also one question, some interest expressed to jointly arrange a training for local level. So same thing, you can reach out to Mai.
Yes.
That's right.
We'll be happy to make this scorecard more usable for the cities and get more and more cities to use it, so you can improve the way that you can plan. forward. And I'll be sharing the presentation also with, actually I have shared with UNPOG colleagues that they will be putting on the learning platform later on.
All right, I think I don't see any other questions. Please let us know if you have any.
Yeah.
Last chance before we move to the quiz.
We have 10 questions for the quiz. Maybe we can also move on to the quiz too, because it also will help you to reflect to see whether you understand or what you feel as your key takeaway from the 3 hours lesson that we have today. And if there are still any pertaining like burning questions you may have, just feel free to drop it in the chat or feel free to email us at any time. We'll be happy to clarify any points that you may have. So why don't we now move on to the quiz, right?
Okay, so
Yes.
I think we're giving the floor to Sanjaya for this.
So Sanjaya will be sharing the screen and you can move ahead. Get this done.
Okay, so let's go to the first question.
Yes. Oh, just one more announcement. The quiz will be done also on Slido.
Yeah.
So again, go on slido.com and type UNDRR as your password. Over to you, Sanjaya. So first question here is basically asking you to type your name. So just before you begin the quiz, just basically type your name, and then we'll move on to the first question. Sanjay, you can see on the top right-hand corner on how many people have joined.
Okay, so this is the first question. Please go ahead. True or false? Are disasters a natural phenomena and the impacts beyond human control? I think more people should join. Those who haven't joined, please join quickly. Okay, let's see the result. Oh, okay. So yes, false is the correct answer, because as we said, disasters, it depends on our choice, on the decisions that we take, on the choices that we make. It depends on that. So if we decide to build along the riverbank and some critical infrastructure like a powerhouse or power distribution center, and then it gets flooded and knocks out the power, that's a decision we took, and a wrong decision. So disasters, the hazards are natural, but how it interacts, it depends on us, and they are within our control mostly. Next question then. So if the city is resilient, it can withstand and recover from the impacts of disasters and from the other shocks and stresses in a relatively short period of time. What do you think? Is that true or is it false? Basically going into the definition of resilience. I think more people should join. We have over 100, and here we have only 60 joined. Those who haven't joined, please join. There are 8 more questions. Okay, so let's look at the result. Yes. So if your city is resilient, it should be able to withstand and recover soon. So like we said, $1 invested in risk reduction is $6 saved. So what it means is that we spend less time on response, less resources, less money, and we are able to recover fairly faster. Next, question 3. So again, poor urban and local governance, ecosystem decline, climate change, vulnerable livelihoods are examples of the drivers of risk. So what it means is drivers of risk is what are those factors which are contributing to increasing risk. So are these factors local governance, ecosystem decline, climate change, and vulnerable livelihoods? Are these factors which increase risk? Yes, they are. Oh, everyone got it. Yes, they are. These are the drivers of risk, including others like poverty, access to health services, access to education, nutrition levels, all of these factors which impact the well-being of a human being and of the community. These are all factors which affect the risk levels. The question 4. So the only department which is related to reduction of risks is the emergency management department. So in most cities, you have emergency management department or civil defense, something similar. So is that the only department which is concerned with DRR, or are there more? Let's see the result. Correct. It is false. It's not the emergency management department. Everyone is involved. Everyone has a role to play, including the mayor's office, the executive office, the health department, the public works, the water and sanitation, all the utilities, and so on. Everyone has a role to play, and they all have a contribution to resilience. Next question, please. So poverty is a socio-economic issue which has no relation to the impact of a disaster. What do you think? So poverty is a socio-economic issue, that is correct. And it has a relation to the impact of disaster, actually. So the false is the correct answer here, because as you know, people who are, and we mentioned this already, who are near or below the poverty line, they have less nutrition, less health services, and so on. So they are more vulnerable and they are more fragile. So if there is any disruption in their livelihoods, it has a major impact on them immediately. So question 6. Using natural ecosystems to reduce disaster risk is one of the essentials for making cities resilient. So this is referring to those 10 essentials. So is using natural ecosystems one of those? Let's see where we are. True. Yes, correct. There it's called natural buffers and using ecosystems. So and we discussed those examples of using green spaces and green infrastructure for absorbing excess water, for example. It's also to reduce the heat in the city. So there are many uses of ecosystem which actually saves money for the city. Number 7. The scorecard can help to understand the status of resilience in the city and the gaps in risk reduction. What do you think? Is that true or false? Yes, it is true. And that's what we talked about, that the scorecard can be used to understand the gaps and use the gaps to develop actions which can be developed into projects. As you saw, Mai explained the example of Lisbon and other cities which converted the actions into projects and then got financing. So yes, the scorecard can help in that. Number 8. So building consensus and working relationships between the different sectors and the departments in the government is not an objective of the scorecard. So trick question, be careful how you answer. What the statement is saying, that there is no need to build a working relationship between the different sectors. That's not what the scorecard is aiming to do. Yes. So it is a false statement, because what the scorecard is trying to do is show the interdependence, and we discuss the system of systems. So it's showing how each sector is related to the other, and there are cascading effects if all the sectors are not resilient. And so that's exactly what the scorecard is trying to do, is build this relationship. And Mai showed that slide also, that one of the advantages of the scorecard, it's not just about doing the scorecard, but it breaks down silos, it opens, removes barriers, and it allows different sectors to have dialogue with each other, and these dialogues and these discussions and knowing the face of the other person is so important when actually there are problems and decision making to be done. So it does all of that. Next question. So resilience is a long-term investment. Even if the city scores high in the scorecard today, the situation may change in the future. So is this true or false? And you remember the example Mai gave of high scoring. Yes, true. It is a long-term investment, and we may score high today, but the situation may change tomorrow. So, for example, cities in Poland currently are accommodating a large number of refugees. So their demography has changed. The vulnerable population has suddenly increased many-fold. So the situation changes. Even when there is a disaster in a neighboring area, there might be mass movement of population trying to avoid the disaster and move into another city. So again, the vulnerability changes with time. the number of senior citizens is increasing around the world. Older people are more. So again, the vulnerability is changing. And then there might be development issues. So there is a city, hypothetically, and a petrochemical complex is established nearby, or a nuclear power plant. So again, the risk profile changes. So yes, doing the scorecard again in a few years is a good practice, because the situation changes. Also, the understanding of risk changes with time. And lastly, with climate change, the frequency and intensity of the hazards might be changing also. So all of these factors and more change things. So every 3-4 years, maybe do the scorecard again will help. Next, and the last question now. So use of the scorecard is a key step towards the development of bankable projects and financing. What do you think? Let's see. Yes, it's correct. As you know, part of the project management cycle is first the assessment and the articulation. What are the gaps? What are the actions to be taken? Who will do what? What is the timeline? What is the budget? And so on. So this is all part of project preparation. And the scorecard helps in doing those steps, just like the example of Lisbon City and others. So it is a step towards the development of bankable projects. And bankable means not only for bank, but even for your own budget office, or even for the city budget office, or for the provincial budget office. They also want to see a clear understanding of the project, a clear concept, a clear articulation of the needs, and all that is done through the scorecard, or rather the scorecard, using the scorecard facilitates that process. So yes, it is a key step. So with that, we end the quiz. Thank you for participating. Oh, and we have, okay, we have winners also. So that's very good. Congratulations. And then I hand over back to Dasha.
Thank you very much, Sanjaya and Mai, and thank you very much to all the participants who have actively contributed to this quiz. So we are now coming to the end of our session. And on behalf of UNDR and our co-organizers, we really hope that you enjoyed the presentations and the exercises today, and that you found them useful, and also that you would be interested to apply the tools presented today and to share them with your colleagues and partners widely. So you can find more information about these tools on the hyperlinks that we shared in the chat, and also in the presentations given by colleagues. And in case of any questions, you are very welcome to reach out to our team using the contacts that are provided in the presentations. As mentioned before, all the presentations will be shared with you through the online e-learning platform, and our colleagues have posted the links also in the chat. So the next and final session of the workshop will be held this Thursday, 14th of July at the same time. And I would like now to invite Ms. Anna Torland from UNPOG to introduce session 4, Making Cities Resilient 2030, and also to close today's meeting. Thank you very much for your participation. And Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dasha. As Dasha said, please mark your agendas. Next Thursday, 14 July, we will have our next and last session. We will have a deep dive into the MCR initiative, and after that, we will welcome Mr. Alexander Mejia, who is the Director of the Division for People and Social Inclusion and Head of CIFAL Global Network based in Geneva. Mr. Mejia will share a presentation on the importance of capacity development for disaster risk management and the learning opportunities with UNITAR. After the break, we will have a final quiz covering the knowledge of the previous sessions. It is not graded, but we will learn by doing it together. To close our session today, I would like to thank our colleagues from UNDR Global Education and Training Institute, Sanjaya, Mai, and Dasha, for the wonderful and interactive session we had today, and to you participants for your attention and engagement in the activities. With this, I close today's session and I wish you all a very good day. See you on Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
See you next session.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Abraita Joseph. Abraita Joseph.